Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. Thank you all for joining in, and my immense gratitude goes to the organizers of this summit. Today, I'll be speaking about our attachment styles in relationships and specifically how we can use Ramadan as a time to develop self awareness of our attachment styles and how we can have God centered relationships. So usually I present this as a four-part discussion where we also discuss relationships, belonging, attachment, and healthy communication. But today, inshallah, I'm just going to provide a brief overview of attachment. So our relationships, we are at the center of so many different relationships in our lives. We have parents, siblings, relatives, spouses, friendships, and coworkers. And some of these relationships may be healthy and beneficial, while others may be conflicted and unhealthy. Attachment can greatly influence the quality of these relationships. So attachment theory was actually developed by psychologists John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, where they observed how children engaged with their caregivers. And what they came up with is that they felt that how those caregivers engaged with their children kind of sets up the framework for our future relationships as adults. So this framework includes four areas. The first one is how a person deals with closeness and emotional intimacy, a person's ability to communicate and listen to emotions and needs, how a person responds to conflicts, and their expectations in these relationships. So there's four different attachment styles: secure, anxious, dismissive, avoidant, and fearful, avoidant. A person who has a secure style will think to themselves that being close is easy and comes naturally, where a person who has an anxious style will think to themselves, I want to be emotionally intimate with people, but they don't want to be with me. A person with a dismissive avoidant style will think to themselves, I'd rather not depend on others or have others depend on me. And a person with a fearful avoidant style will think to themselves, if I get too close, then I'm worried I will get hurt. So let's dive a little deeper into each of these attachment styles. Research shows that core beliefs are actually they're the foundational beliefs that we have that can drive our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So the secure person believes that they're worthy of love, they're able to give and receive emotional comfort, they're trusting in their relationships, and they feel safe. Research shows that the caregivers of the secure attachment style were responsive, present, attuned. They may have made mistakes, as all caregivers make mistakes, but they would recognize those mistakes and make repairs quickly. So as adults, they turn into adults that are trusting of others. They can tolerate closeness to others, but also tolerate distance and space with their loved ones. Distance and space, especially when their loved ones focus on other things. Being close and loving comes naturally to this attachment style. They don't get upset or jealous easily, and they're able to effectively communicate their needs. Even when the behavior of the other person is upsetting, the secure person is able to set that aside and be able to resolve their conflicts. So research shows that the core beliefs of the anxious style are that they believe that they are not worthy of love. They can't get love without being angry, clingy, or desperate. That others are trustworthy and reliable, but may abandon them because of their worthlessness. The caregiver of the anxious style was often emotionally present and attuned, but only some of the time. And in addition to that, they had an experience where maybe their parent was depressed or had a drug addiction or was working a lot. It was kind of like a flip-flop experience for them, and this created a lot of internal anxiety. So as adults, they love to be close to others, but they fear that others don't want to be as close as they want to be. So they can be sensitive towards changes in their relationships. Their nervous system gets activated very quickly when something small happens in the relationship, and they're not direct in expressing their feelings. They can also often get easily upset. The core beliefs of the dismissive avoidant are that they believe that they're only worthy of love based on their success and accomplishments. So they think that they can only get love when when they're doing something successful. They feel that others are capable of getting. They believe that they're capable of getting love, but they have to kind of depend on themselves because others are unwilling to give them love. The caregiver of the dismissive avoidant was more on the neglectful side. So it was a parent that was only accepting of the child in parts. Maybe they wanted the child to be really good at achieving things or getting good grades. So the child felt loved when they did well, but were not fully seen for when they did not do well. So they didn't have their needs fully accepted or met. So as adults, they can grow up to be really independent. They're able to take care of themselves and can be very career driven and self-sufficient. And it may look like they're not interested in relationships, but they really have a hard time showing vulnerability to someone. They're also used to taking care of themselves so that anybody coming into that inner space can feel really threatening to them. Research shows that the fearful avoidant style believes that they're not worthy of love, that they can't get love without being angry or clingy, that others are not trustworthy, they're unreliable, and they're abusive. And they actually feel that they are deserving of that abuse. Research shows that the caregivers of this style were abusive, whether it was emotional, mental, verbal, even physical. The caregivers were actually struggling to regulate their own emotions and oftentimes were going through managing their own trauma. So many of these caregivers are going through their own grief and loss, and they end up taking care of their children in very threatening ways that's not in tune with their child's needs. So as adults, these children grow up to wanting closeness because they had a connection with their parent, but they were afraid of what they were going to get, either love or abuse. So they kind of have this internal push-pull in relationships. They can often be overstressed and overwhelmed and dysregulated, and they can't regulate what's going on for themselves. So in addition to the framework established by the caregiver, we can also experience changes in our attachment style based on our own life experiences and challenges. So attachment injuries or wounds, as they're called, can also be caused by not only our caregivers, but also romantic partners and peers and any other close relationship. These situations sometimes can be very indirect and subtle and often can be downplayed, but they can have profound wounds to the soul. So some examples of what those attachment wounds or injuries may look like between a parent and a child. It can be a mother who is frequently distressed and becomes unavailable to her children. And so some of the kids may experience an attachment wound. It can be a parent who becomes ill or is either hospitalized or incapacitated, making them physically unavailable to the child. And that absence can become an injury for the child. It could even be a parent who puts down his or her children when they get upset about day-to-day stressors. or a parent who sends the message where the child can't take care of themselves. So kind of like the overbearing parent that does too much for the child. Even that can have an effect on the child. And then between spouses, an attachment wound can look like maybe a husband who had a difficult and prolonged project at work and as a result became unavailable to his wife when she had to deal with the death of her father. And so she was left all alone. Or a husband who ignores his wife's comments about physically and emotionally being exhausted with taking care of the children all day. And he's kind of dismissive of those feelings. That can be a wound for the wife. Or maybe it's the wife that's dismissive of her husband's emotions when he is under stress. Between peers, it can even be, if a close friend seeks support of another close friend during a difficult transition and finds that friend unavailable. So all of these things can cause changes and shifts in our core beliefs, which can change our attachment styles. So COVID-19 at its core is forcing us to look at our attachment, to evaluate our attachments because the success of the virus is dependent upon people being in proximity to each other. The normal distractions of self-avoidance that we have are now limited, and we're forced to look at ourselves and also look at our loved ones and our relationships with them. We can't hide, and we have to now look and examine at our stressors as they come up. And we are forced to look at attachment at the individual level, but also at the family level and the societal level. So what is your attachment style? Well, learning about attachment styles can actually be really life-changing. Once you identify which one resonates for you, it can help you understand your strengths and your weaknesses, as well as your limitations. One important thing that I do want to mention is that attachment styles are not fixed. They're fluid and can evolve and change over time. How we're relating to our family members or who we are friends with or in a relationship with can really affect our attachment. We benefit from this knowledge when we focus on kind of amplifying our healthy behaviors and learning to change our unhealthy ones. So we don't have to be securely attached to have a healthy relationship, but we do need to have a strong awareness of our unhealthy patterns. And also in the Islamic tradition, there is a long-standing practice of something called muhasaba, which is essentially taking yourself to account. So we need to be willing to work towards calling ourselves out quickly when our unhealthy behaviors come up. Also, working on healthy coping skills to become more relationship-centered instead of self-centered. But ideally, we want to become God-centered. So in my work with Khalil Center, where we focus on traditional Islamic integrated psychotherapy, I add, especially for my Muslim clients, I feel there's one critically important piece missing here, and that is our attachment to God. My research in this area shows that our attachment styles can also provide the framework of how we relate to God. So a research study at a faith-based college found that students who felt they had a secure relationship with God felt loved by God. And those with an insecure relationship style felt anger towards God, doubted their forgiveness, and were more likely to give up on God and fall into sinful habits. So a person with an anxious style may not turn to God for comfort. Instead, they'll turn to things like people or addictions. The dismissive avoidant may turn away from God and become angry and resentful and focus more on being self-sufficient. The fearful avoidant may turn away from God with anger and turn to others with clinginess or to their addictions to calm unresolved feelings. And the secure style, they ultimately turn to God. So they may feel anger, they may feel sadness, they may even ask why, but they're constantly working toward turning to Him and accepting His will. So all our attachments, Muslims prioritize their attachment to God because God is at the center of all things. All of everything goes back to Him. So there is no better time to focus on constantly internally turning toward Him than in Ramadan, because we're already working on seeking Him more through all of our different acts of worship than any other time of the year. We can develop attachment wounds, like we talked about, from all different kinds of people: caregivers, parents, spouses, close relationships. This is the nature of relationships with people. No one is perfect. Everyone is trying their best, and everyone will lack something. If we seek this world, it will be inconsistent. But if we seek the divine, we will be gifted with the consistency and divine perfection in some part of our life through Him. So you may have turned away from God. Maybe you're angry with Him. Maybe you don't turn to Him for comfort. Maybe you turn to other things, maybe even people. And it's okay. This is a journey, and it's your journey. The moment you turn to God is the moment you are in His protection. If you're looking for love and mercy, then know that He is the most loving and the most merciful. If you're looking for compassion and forgiveness, then know that He is the most compassionate and all forgiving. He is the only one that can meet all of our needs. Through our relationship with Him, we can change our core beliefs about ourselves. Every single human being will fall short, but not Him. To have a secure relationship with God, we just have to turn to Him with consistency, with all of our imperfections and needs. So relationships in Ramadan. So once we've put God at the center of our relationships, then those relationships that are created through, by, and for God, and not any other worldly reason, those relationships will have an everlasting nature and connectedness. This doesn't mean that it will be easy or it won't be messy or complicated, but with a good opinion of God, we will have relationship optimism. And that trust and attachment to God goes hand in hand with all of our relationships. So having a secure relationship with God does not mean that your problems will go away, but it can help you make change. For example, if you never felt loved by your parents, and maybe you've spent so much time looking for that love everywhere, but the second you start seeking that love from God, then that core belief that you have that you're not lovable changes to, I am lovable. And naturally, that changes your thoughts, your behaviors, your feelings, and the behaviors that then stem from that core belief will be more positive, and you'll start to feel more security in yourself and your others. So healing from attachment injuries. Make your relationship with God top priority, because He is the only one that can satisfy all of the conditions of a healthy and secure relationship. Get to know your attachment patterns. So try to observe yourself, develop self-awareness, maybe journal, spend time getting to know how you react in relationships. Also, reading a good book about attachment can really help you self-reflect. seek out others with secure attachment styles. So seeking out others with secure attachment styles can help you have positive experiences and can actually help you overcome the insecurity. Learning and practicing skills. So skill building is not something that that we already have, right? It's something that we have to learn. Somebody teaches us somewhere along the way. So we can actually develop skills to regulate our own emotions. We can learn skills to how to communicate our emotional needs. And we can also learn skills on how to resolve conflicts in a positive way. And Ramadan is a wonderful time to take the step in bettering yourself because we're already primed for spiritual connection and self-improvement. So it's much easier to start now. And lastly, finding a good therapist to help you along your journey. So if you're someone who you're having a lot of difficulty in your relationships, it's really overwhelming, seek help from a therapist because it's someone who's professionally trained and can be objective and sit with you and help you identify your negative patterns, your positive patterns, and help you facilitate change. And actually, for couples, there is a couples therapy. It's called EFT couples therapy that kind of focuses on using this theory. And research shows that 90% of couples that kind of engage in this kind of couples therapy show improvement. So with that, I'd like to conclude. If there are any questions, I would love to answer them now, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, therapist Rana. Barakallahu fiki. To all our attendees, inshallah, you can continue submitting questions to the Q&A for the next few minutes, inshallah. I have a question for you, inshallah. I would think there's probably some people that are more vulnerable to the sort of social repercussions that exist now because of social distancing and because of quarantine, and that would likely be folks that are more extroverted and sort of like derive their own energy from like being around other people, their creativity, their productivity, their spirituality. And then there's those where if you want to discuss like love languages, like those that are that their love languages are perhaps like spending quality time and like physical touch and things like that. Perhaps these kind of individuals with these sort of personalities are perhaps more vulnerable, whereas others might not necessarily be reacting as strongly to being in quarantine. So like what would you say about, or like how would you advise folks that are kind of experiencing this time like a little bit more difficult, with a little bit more difficulty?
You mean in reference to attachment, how somebody who's extroverted, how they can work on that part of themselves? Is that your question, if I understand correctly?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, like being extroverted is I mean, it is a personality trait, but of course, this might mean that during social distancing, it's difficult for them to kind of be at their peak self, and be maybe as productive or as spiritually inclined, like especially during Ramadan.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I mean, if you look at the qualities of an extroverted and introverted, um, if you look at the difference, a person who's introverted drives energy from being alone, and a person who's extroverted gets that energy from being with people. And so, of course, for an extroverted person, this is probably a really difficult time to not be able to have the company of other people, especially for those who live alone. And it's actually, you know, it's one of those things. It's such a challenge right now, but I think it's such a great opportunity, if they allow it to be, for them to kind of turn more inward. Because when you're extroverted, sometimes you can kind of become so occupied with people that you kind of forget about yourself. And so this can be seen as an opportunity for them to kind of turn inward and sit with the discomfort of not being able to get that energy from other people, and what does that mean for them, and what are other ways that they can drive that energy that can help fuel their creativity and help them be at their maximum. And then of course, if we're looking at it through the attachment lens, it would be great to seek that from God first and then find other ways that they can do that.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you for your answer. There's a few questions from the audience, inshallah, so I'll go ahead and read them off. How do we deal with people who are avoidant in our community? I know someone who doesn't engage with others, probably dismissive, avoidant, but it gets exhausting to be the person always reaching out.
Yes. So I think the first step for attachment is to focus on yourself and figure out what your style is and how you are, like what are your strengths and weaknesses. Once you have that in place, then you can kind of maybe start looking at what the other person is. So if you're talking about a dismissive avoidant, a lot of times, let's say for example, like you're an anxious type, and you're kind of friends with a lot of dismissive avoidant people. And not to say that like either of these styles is bad, but each of them have their strengths and limitations. And so a person who's anxious will constantly try to, because they want that closeness, will seek that closeness from the dismissive avoidant. But because the dismissive avoidant feels uncomfortable with that closeness, will withdraw. And so if you can see, what's going to happen here is the anxious will continue to seek closeness, and this dismissive will continue to withdraw further and further. And sometimes the gap between them can become huge. So it's really important to know what you are and then figure out how you can relate with the people who are different from you in a positive way. And a lot of that comes with setting boundaries and figuring out what is your limit as far as how much you extend yourself. So if you're kind of overextending yourself to accommodate the dismissive avoidant, then that's kind of a poor boundary on your part. And so you have to really figure out where that boundary lies.
Jazakallah khair. All right, next question, inshallah. People grieving for loved ones can benefit from developing a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Acknowledging that no one else can replace the missed individuals and engaging in good charitable causes to benefit them spiritually can help the grieving. Please share insight about this particular lived experience, recent personal losses.
Can you read that one more time?
Yes, absolutely. People grieving for loved ones can benefit from developing relationships with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm assuming this is like for the loss of loved ones, acknowledging that no one else can replace the missed individuals and engaging in good charitable causes to benefit them spiritually can help the grieving. Please share insight about this particular lived experience, recent personal losses.
Yeah, so for people, especially during this time, I mean, there's people losing loved ones at just like, at like an expedited rate. And it's very difficult. Grieving is probably, grief and loss is probably one of the most difficult things a person will experience in their life. And it's kind of on a spectrum. And a lot of times grief and loss can cause an attachment injury, especially if it was someone really close to you, because you're missing them and you really actually sometimes don't understand why they were taken. So there can be a lot of questioning, there can be denial, there can be sadness and anger. But really it's a process, and a person going through grief and loss through God can allow themselves to go through all of the different difficult emotions that come with grief and loss. But hopefully the goal is through when you're, you know, when you're constantly just turning to God despite everything that's coming up, looking for answers. And the most important part is finding meaning in the loss. And once you find that meaning, once you get to that point, and sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes years, but once you find that meaning, that kind of gives it that spiritual closure that you need to kind of move on, or kind of put to kind of seal that grief and loss. So I would say the most important thing is to kind of seek meaning making, and but at the same time allow yourself to go through the process of grief.
Jazakallah khair. And now, two folks have asked basically about how they can connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be more God-centered, as well as if someone is not having their dua answered, what would you suggest that they do?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times when we're seeking something specific, we kind of put a condition on our relationship with God that, you know, this is something I want from you and I'm not getting, and because I'm not getting it, I'm now angry at you, and I may turn away, you know. And I think it's that process of continually having that open conversation with God where despite not getting it, developing that relationship where you're secure with him will help you understand that everything he does is for your benefit, and your everything that he does is for your benefit, and nothing that he does would be harmful to you. And so we go through so many difficult experiences in life that, you know, we feel like we don't really deserve from God. And I think the important thing here is turning to him with those feelings, turning to him with your complaints about not getting what you want, or looking for relief and not getting it, because he's the one that's all hearing, right? If we want someone to hear us and see us, then he's the one that we have to be turning to with all of it, and just having that open relationship and dialogue with God, no matter how you're feeling.
Jazakallah khair. Now we have one more question. Can we help our parents overcome their insecure attachment styles, especially if they are resistant to therapy?
So this is such a loaded question, because it's like we want to help our parents, and what we can do is, of course, we want to see the best for our parents, and maybe we can see, especially in a lot of different cultures, there can be a lot of unhealthy attachment, which can create codependency. And sometimes when we are improving ourselves, we can kind of see that clearly in our family dynamics. And at the most, what we can do is try to educate them, try to, you know, give them examples, or try to share with them what you've learned. But it kind of has to stop there. And there's only so much that you can do to help your parents. And after that, I would just say we have to turn to dua and just asking Allah to guide them and heal them and help them, because again, it's their personal journey, their personal relationship with God as well.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. Looks like those are all the questions that we have. Alhamdulillah.
Assalamu alaikum. There's one more question in the chat. We encourage people to answer in the Q&A, but there's one in the chat.
Sure.
Yeah, it says, I believe. Yeah, sorry about that, Sister Sada. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's totally fine. I actually can't see the question, so you can go ahead and read it off.
Okay. It says, I believe after listening, I could be a secure person or have a secure person style. How can I help someone with the anxious style?
Yeah, so I think a person who has a secure style can help a person with did it say anxious style?
Yes, that's what it said.
Okay, yeah, so a person with an anxious style can often, when let's say like, you know, they're just really seeking closeness and they're used to a certain kind of closeness with you regularly, right? And maybe something happens and you get busy with something, and so that closeness in that friendship or relationship changes. And so the anxious style then starts getting worried. You as a secure person, the best thing you can do is just give them reassurance that despite despite the distance in your relationship or the change in closeness, does not mean that anything has changed. And that will help them kind of have that reassurance that you're still there for them, you still love them, you still honor them, and that relationship is still valuable. And so that reassurance usually calms the anxious person, where they can kind of move on without fearing that they're losing the relationship.